Hello everyone, I'm Jippe from the Holland Smolen, and today we're going to talk about the stone crane, specifically the safety aspects of the stone. I'm going to show some PowerPoint slides, which I will turn on now. So the topic of today is working safely with a stone crane. Let's start with what exactly a stone crane is. Many millers will know it, but let's go over it anyway. The stone crane is an essential tool for the traditional corn miller. It's used to lift the runner stones, so the top stones, to flip them for maintenance and cleaning. These tasks are quite risky. You're dealing with very large weights, and there are no structural safety measures or guidelines that everyone follows. That's why these tasks are even more risky. In the working days of the millers, this was, of course, a regular procedure. A lot of grinding was done, and the stones often had to be laid open for cleaning. But nowadays, there is much less grinding, and we actually have, compared to the past, much less experience and routine, especially in these tasks. Also, working with the stone crane is not a standard part of the training. At the end of 2022, an accident occurred with a stone crane, where a millstone fell from the crane and went through several floors. Luckily, there were no serious injuries, but awareness was raised that maybe a better look should be taken at the safety aspects of this stone crane. The Holland Smolen, together with the painters of millers and the safety study group, conducted a technical investigation into the accident. On one side, it was about how this specific accident could happen, technically speaking, with that crane. But actually, it turned out that the cause was much broader. There were several technical aspects of that stone crane that were more commonly recognized. The investigation showed that there is very little visibility on the safety aspects of stone cranes. They can have different forms. Sometimes they are monumentally old or not. There is no protocol for working with a stone crane, or that everyone follows the same safety procedures. An analysis of the incident registration of the Guild showed that incidents with the stone crane occur regularly. Here we see an image among images from the incident at the end of 2022. Let's quickly go over the operation of the stone crane. It's obviously a wooden structure with a brace where the stones are hung in two brackets. So the stone, it moves via a spindle nut, spinning the turnaround. This lifts the screw thread up, which lifts the stone. It's also possible to rotate the stone completely so it can be moved in the desired direction. Of course, the whole structure can also rotate on a lower and upper bearing, allowing the stone to be repositioned as needed. We've divided the safe operation of the stone crane into three phases. It's crucial to understand that this is a shared responsibility between the miller and the mill owner. Therefore, these three phases are truly set up as something we need to tackle together. Of course, there are specific tasks that fall more on the miller or the mill owner, but that is part of the responsibility sharing. We start with phase one of safely operating the stone crane, which includes the preparations and what we call the human sections. We've made a checklist for each phase, and we'll go through these to review them thoroughly. It's important that the miller is practiced in using it. We mentioned earlier that inexperience can lead to accidents, and routine is particularly important. So even if you're inexperienced with working the stone crane, ask for assistance from an experienced miller. Naturally, for these kinds of operations, there must be at least two millers present. Additionally, it's important to have an emergency plan available. For these dangerous activities, it's really crucial. What should you do if something goes wrong? And everyone needs to be aware of what to do in such a scenario. Of course, safe clothing and shoes are so important. Think of loose clothing that could get caught. It hardly needs repeating, but safety shoes are indeed crucial. Before starting the activities, the procedure must be discussed. This means everyone present for this activity must review the entire process. There are also some points of attention that need specific following up. The entire workspace around the stone and the stone crane must be clean and free of obstacles. This is important to prevent tripping hazards, slipping, and remove any loose parts or items that don't belong there. Well, before starting, all necessary materials should be prepared. Think of hoists, shackles, stockwood, or the ropes. Maybe an extra hoist to move the stone spindle sideways. It depends on the situation. Well, having a charged phone is always handy, but it's really important that it, as part of the emergency plan, is within reach in case of an emergency. And we just talked about the procedure. It's important that the positions where the stone spindle and the runner will eventually lie are determined beforehand, so there's no discussion during the lifting. Preferably, lay both flat. If the stone spindle is to be hung, it must be double secured. The same goes for a standing runner, which is placed against the wall. Always double secure against falling. Now we move on to phase 2. This concerns the technical condition of the stone crane. There are 4 main general checkpoints, and then we'll zoom in on the technical condition of the crane itself with some example photos to help you focus. So indeed, it's important that the stone crane is inspected and in technically good condition. We'll zoom in on that shortly. Furthermore, it's important that the hoisting equipment and the hanging of the stone game are in good condition. The stone game cannot be removed without aids, and the hoisting points and attachments must be in good condition. Again, if the stone game cannot be placed and is hung, it must be double secured. Next, it's important to check the stone crane has been altered, modified, or damaged. Some stone cranes are very old or have been adjusted. There might be a crack, especially if the crane is really old and original and belonged to the mill. There might be some damage, so it's worth considering storing this old one and making a new replica for safe use. Also, ensure that the replica is well constructed, and if you decide to use the old crane, make sure it's not weakened. You can definitely notice the weakening because all the clamps, bolts, and nuts must be tight and securely fastened. It's really crucial that they're put together strongly. Here we see the crane with actually all the checkpoints indicated around it. We're now going to quickly go over them from above, clockwise, and we've got some footage to go along with it. We'll start here at the upper bearing needs to be firmly in place and well anchored. We see in a photo here that the upper bearing is secured with 2 very small wood screws. That's definitely not enough. Another point at the top of the crane is securing the threading. In this photo, you see that it's missing, but it's important that the threading is secured at the top so it can't come out completely. Those pendulums that must be properly fastened at the upper level also need to be well lubricated. The threading itself and the spindle must be intact, not rusted, not damaged, not worn, and not dirty. We'll show some more footage of this later. In these 2 photos, for example, we see that the threading is really worn out. And here on the right photo, you even see at the bottom left of the picture that the threading is completely coming loose. There's a crack in it. These are really dangerous situations, so it's important to be very mindful of them. Next, we see here that the threading has completely failed. So if you start turning it here, it has no grip at all anymore, and the stone will just fall down. At the bottom of the threading, you have the eyes, the brackets that ultimately hold the stones. Of course, you need to carefully check that there are no cracks in these eyes and fittings, especially if they are welded eyes. The brackets must also be the right size, and it's very important that they have a sufficient curve so the stone remains free from the brackets. Only the rings should be in contact. Where the contact with the stone actually occurs, that happens through pins. These pins must be inserted horizontally in a clean drill hole and perpendicular to the side of the stone. The pins should not fit tightly in the drill hole. There should be a bit of play. Also ensure that there is a ring between the bracket and the stone, and of course, make sure that the millstone itself has no cracks. The drill holes should be intact and not chipped on the side, because then they won't have enough grip. At the bottom of the stone, since we're now moving clockwise, we have reached the bottom of the stone crane. There's, of course, a base, which must be as firmly secured and well lubricated as the upper bearing. It must be well anchored and not worn. Also pay close attention to the floor beams on which the stone crane rests. These must naturally be strong enough. That pivot point should be cleaned and free of any dirt. The wooden part of the crane, namely the upright and the brace, must of course not be affected by wood-destroying insects or by wood rot, so check carefully for that as well. We also have a nice photo on that. Furthermore, it's important to thoroughly check all wood joints, ensuring they are tightly fitted and that the braces are also secure. Here we see a broken eyelet, which could potentially cause a stone to fall out. Some more images of thread damage. Here you see that a whole piece is missing. If you see this, you should not start using this mechanism at all. So, well, here we see more images of the wood construction. In the photo on the left, we see that the crane has been somewhat modified, with a much heavier brace initially installed that has now been replaced by a much smaller and lighter one. Alarm bells should go off, as this construction has been seriously weakened compared to its original design. In the right photo, we can see that the parts of the crane are completely deformed and therefore really seriously weakened. Then we move on to phase 3, because we have now completed the preparations. Now the actual work is going to start. There are 3 important checkpoints again here. First, the mill must obviously be stopped and secured. It needs to be firmly fixed. This prevents the miller's attention from being divided, focusing on the weather instead of on the work at hand. Additionally, the work area under the hoisting area of the stone crane should be cordoned off. During such dangerous tasks, nobody who has no business being there should be present. So make sure, for example, the mill shop is closed, the mill itself is closed for visitors. And indeed, if the milling floor is not on the ground floor, it is even more important. The rest of the mill must be empty as well. When loosening the stone spindle at one eye, pay attention to the movement right after it comes loose, as it can suddenly swing to one side. Next, when laying down the stone spindle, ensure there is a plank under the claw iron. Further, during all turning operations, for instance, when turning the crane, only pushing should be done. If you pull on it, if the crane becomes unsteady, you might pull it over yourself. The same applies when turning the stone. Only lift, never push. Never get under the stone, not even with hands or feet. Stay away and always stand next to the stone crane, not in front or behind it, because if it falls out of balance, it will always go towards the stone, not to the side. When turning up, also use the nut. Avoid turning the stone with a locked nut and prevent the runner from hitting hard on the body while winding up. Use stop blocks for that. Why are all these points important? I emphasize it once again. This is really a shared responsibility of the mill owner and the miller. And it is crucial that these traditional works can continue as safely as possible. It is in our best interest if we can reduce accidents as much as possible, so that safe working gets the attention it deserves, allowing us to continue doing these traditional tasks ourselves. It's truly part of the craft of milling. including the safety measures. This is ultimately the goal of this infographic and the research, of course, to optimally manage these risks so we can all continue this work for a long time. Thank you very much, and work safely with needles.